I'm never happy or content with what I'm doing. I always will get to a point where I think of what do I need to do next to kind of continue to kind of progress.
It feels like there's a lot of people out there that don't do that or don't leave the team and have been there for years in the same place for years and years. And lots of people will understand this and feel like, oh, that's me.
I would like to be somebody who proves to the people who come after me that you can do it. There may be a ceiling. You can break through that ceiling. You're not made to have been stuck at a level. There is always room for progression.
Why do you feel like organisations that have forums, you know, race forums or diversity forums or equality forums, why do you feel it's not quite getting there at the moment?
If power in the UK has a colour, it's still predominantly white.
Only about 11% of board members identify as Black, Asian, or minority ethnic.
You know, I can't change the colour of my skin. I'm not going to change that I'm a woman. I can't change what class I am, and I don't want to either. I'm very proud of who I am and where I come from.
New research shows that fewer than 5% of the UK's top leaders come from ethnic minorities.
The reality is, if you're Black, if you're Asian, or if you're an ethnic minority, it is harder for us.
Daniel! Are you like, yes? Right, so Daniel, I think for me, the reason why I really wanted you on the RISEilience podcast is because I feel like a lot of people can relate to your journey. So I want to start by hearing a little bit about that. So your experience, your career journey, are you able to take us through that a little bit?
So 2012,
Wow.
I joined Islington as a business support apprentice within the transformation team. That was, I would say, my first proper job. So prior to that, I was studying, did A-levels in business, English and IT. Dropped out of college, wasn't really committed to it. I then tried to go and do mechanics. Again, I realised that wasn't for me. Too much hard work for me. And then decided to go down the apprenticeship route, which was extremely interesting. I didn't know at the time what transformation was or how the apprenticeship would work. Seemingly it works out okay. So following that, I had another couple of roles within the transformation team in Islington. So there was project officer, kind of project support type roles. Then moving on a couple more years following that, I was in the kind of more of the project manager space. And then took a sideways step more into the kind of PMO kind of structure sort of space where we are. And currently at the moment I've moved, so I'm about a year into my current role in Kingston as a corporate change and improvement partner, which again is slightly different to what I've been doing. So always been in a kind of transformation setting. Didn't particularly see that as a kind of a long-term career, but I think over the years through the kind of positions which I've been in, the kind of experiences I've picked up, it's kind of lend itself for me to keep going forward in my kind of career. So thoroughly enjoying it at the moment. Again, I still don't know what my end goal is or where I would like to be in 5 years. So I'm kind of more of a type of person that likes to kind of go with the flow and just take things a day at a time, really.
See, but you've always said this. I even remember when I worked with you, you were always kind of, yeah, you know, you just seem very calm, I've said this to you so many times, just calm, cool, collected, and just kind of going with it. But at the same time, there's been something there that does keep you focused. I feel a bit like you're underestimating how you go with the flow a bit, but actually there must be some level of determination or focus. Even the fact that you started as an apprentice in transformation, that's quite a big step to go from mechanics or, you know, studying English and business and then going into that field. Like, what do you think it is that might be there under the surface that has kept you stable, secure, and just progressing over the years?
So I like to think I'm a pretty driven person. So I'm not one to kind of like to stagnate and do something for a long period of time, which is not challenging me. There's a lot of emphasis of mine is kind of focus on kind of growth and trying to be the best I can be and learn more and develop more. So I'm never happy or content with what I'm doing. I always will get to a point where I think of what do I need to do next to kind of continue to kind of progress. So I think that's it, really. The most important thing that I'm kind of driven and focused. And again, I think the other thing which has helped that is I'm not completely solely focused on work. So I know work is important. You spend a lot of your time kind of working, but I like to think I have a good work-life balance and I have the ability to kind of switch off when I'm not at work, which kind of keeps me slightly refreshed and I don't really burn out or drained from thinking about work too much.
When you're referring to your driven, focus, that side of things, where does that come from? Is something that's always been with you? Is it someone that's got you into that zone?
So I think particularly from my mother, who was kind of very driven. So she was a nurse. She came over to England in about the 1980s. She worked pretty much every day of her life until she retired. So she's always kind of been steadfast on me making sure that I'm committed to what I'm doing, to take things seriously. There's obviously going to be ups and downs, rough patches, particular times where you're not feeling particularly happy, but you've just got to kind of persevere and push through. And then again, my dad, I think my dad's a very adaptable person. He's done a variety of different things. He's pretty old-fashioned in a sense in terms of kind of his morals and the way that he approaches life. But again, I think the combination of the two of them and upbringing which they gave me has kind of led me to be the person I am today.
It's interesting because anyone that I speak to, because obviously I talk about career and things a lot with colleagues and things like that, it always tends to root back to the parents in some way. And I feel like when you're from a Black, Asian, minority ethnic background, the term hardworking always comes in. It's not like, you know, oh, my parent had an amazing network and connected me up, or my parent was already a chief exec, so I was really, you know, like it was their hard work. It was almost their resilience that inspires. And do you feel like it's a strength, or do you feel like in some ways that made us overthink things or not go down the natural route that others might, or anything like that? What's your reflection on having parents that have had to kind of work and build their way up, because obviously first generation, that side of things?
So I think I completely kind of understand their kind of perspective on things. I have a slightly different take on things. So I've kind of been born and raised in London, Islington. So I think it's just a combination of me picking out the kind of gems and pieces of information which they could provide to me, which I feel will add value, but then not kind of strip that away. So I'm completely following the kind of direction which they wanted to go. Me kind of understanding my environment and the things which are going around me and kind of how best I need to kind of maneuver. So, yeah, I wouldn't say I had the kind of easiest of upbringings, although my parents were very there for me and kind of tried to keep me on the straight and narrow. I had a bit of a troublesome patch during my kind of late teen years where I was doing stuff which I shouldn't particularly have been doing. And I kind of got to the point where I knew it was either going to go one way or the other. I'd like to think I'm a pretty intelligent person. So at first I would say it was kind of hard to distance myself from some of the stuff which I was doing, where a lot of my friends now are either dead or in prison or not doing so great for themselves. So again, I think for me, it's just focus. And once I'm kind of determined to do something, that I know I can do it. So that is, I would say, the most important thing.
Do you feel like because of that, it's worked to your advantage because you had to make that choice, it had to pay off, you know, you had to make it work, and that's where the drive and determination comes from? Or do you feel actually in some ways by making that choice you had to work double as hard and you had to put in double the effort, and actually it always feels like you're having to push yourself and work the mind and work yourself to kind of stay, like, you know, in your words, on the straight and narrow and that side of things?
Definitely feel like I had to work twice as hard, especially even kind of entering the council as an apprentice. I always felt like I was kind of badged with that apprentice label, and I had to go above and beyond to kind of prove to people that I'm no longer this kind of entry junior level person who's just come into the organisation, and I know what I'm doing and I'm capable.
That is really hard. So coming in as an apprentice and then letting go of that and not being constantly seen as an assistant or a helper, or was there like a turning moment for you that you felt this is the point where I think I was recognised as more than just an apprentice, or, you know, however you want to term it, but was there like a turning point?
I think it would be when I took my first step out the core kind of transformation function. So when I did a year secondment in adult social care, where I was working with a complete new set of people who I didn't necessarily kind of come into contact with, which kind of gave me the opportunity to feel like I had a bit of a clean slate to kind of prove myself and what I'm capable of doing.
I always feel like, I don't know, we tend to not take risks or prefer to be a little bit more in our comfort zones. And in some ways that's handy because then you don't really have a worry because you're with what you're used to. But in other ways, if the first point at which you felt your skills were being recognised was when you moved out of the team to then come back, it feels like there's a lot of people out there that don't do that or don't leave the team and have been there for years in the same place for years and years. And lots of people will understand this and feel like, oh, that's me. What did it take for you to think, no, I've got to go out now?
For me, again, I felt like I wasn't really being pushed. I needed to do something different. It was either find something different within the councils to do or try and look elsewhere. Again, I think there was still an element of me trying to be within my comfort zone. So me being in Islington the whole of my life, I know the borough inside and out. I knew pretty much everybody who worked in Islington. So it was still a bit of a safe space, but it was something for me to kind of dip my toe out of the water a bit to kind of try something different.
And something I've always noticed about you is you have a very strong ability to do this. I don't know how to refer to it. It's like it's almost like a silent network. It's like you have an amazing network. You're someone who I've never felt you outwardly get frustrated or angry or bruise relationships with anyone, which I think is a huge skill. You know, you ultimately, everyone gets on with Daniel, you know, and like you say, you work in corporate transformation. So there's lots of colleagues and people that come across you and you're always just seen as someone who is just, you know, cool Daniel, that kind of thing. Is there something that you reflect on and that you always do to enable that? And the fact that you do have really good relationships with some really influential people in the organisation, do you go out of your way to make that happen? Or is it that it just naturally works out that way?
I think it's a bit of both. So I think I consciously made the effort in Islington to sit in the chief exec's office because I knew that's where you would have kind of all of the service directors, corporate directors in. It made me a bit more of a visible presence in terms of I could actually kind of have those off the cuff conversations with them. They would find out who I am. Some of them would be interested in finding out what exactly I'm doing. Some not so interested, which is completely understandable. I like to think that my people skills in general are my best trait. So I wouldn't say I'm a specialist in anything. I am a generalist in terms of my ability to kind of pick up stuff and read the room and kind of read environments has played a kind of crucial part in helping me to get to where I am.
Do you feel like we have a way of downplaying ourselves? So for example, one way you could have presented that is my skills are transferable, but instead we kind of have that habit of I'm not really that specialist at anything. And how do we overcome something like that? Or is it something that you still continue to work on? Or is it even important?
So I think at times I doubt myself. I wouldn't say that my kind of self-confidence is sky high. Something which I know is probably something which I need to work on in terms of actually kind of being more confident in my ability, especially when I know I can do stuff. But again, I think it might even be a kind of race thing. So being from a kind of ethnic minority in terms of where I feel like I need to go above and beyond to kind of showcase my talent. Whereas it could be a kind of counterpart who is English or something and they might not have to work as hard, or it is a lot easier for them to kind of be noticed and the spotlight kind of shone on them. So that's something which I've been extremely mindful of as well.
Is there anything outside of that you feel like in your progression to becoming a leader that I find this bit really hard, or I can't quite work out how the people at the top table seem to do this? Is there anything that you're like, if I crack that, I'm halfway there?
I'm not quite sure. I think the one thing in hindsight, which I think I would have liked to have done, is to kind of gone to uni and actually study the formal qualification. So me going through the apprenticeship route, he gave me the opportunity to kind of have the hands-on experience, but the kind of academic side of things, I feel like that's something which I've been trying to kind of play catch up on. Again, something which I'm mindful of in terms of doing a lot of research. So at the moment, I'm about to do a leadership and management qualification, which I feel will kind of give me that added kind of knowledge and information which I do need to help me get to the next step. So again, even management. So I didn't have my first kind of management job until 3 or 4 years ago. I never managed anybody at all. The only sort of management experience I had was being captain of a football team, which in a sense I related back to it, me having to kind of manage people to get people to pull in the right direction. So I feel like everything which I've done today has been kind of on the job. And in hindsight, I probably should have spent a little bit more time on the other side of things, so the kind of books sort of stuff, qualification sort of stuff.
Academic.
Yeah.
Why? Like where? So this keeps coming up with various people around. I either had a degree and it progressed me. I had a degree and to be honest, I think experience is more important. Or I don't have a degree and I feel like it's impacted. Like where do you feel it impacts? Is it that you can't apply for certain jobs, or is it that it's somehow impacted on your performance?
So I wouldn't say it has impacted me yet, but I feel like the level I'm at now, in order for me to get to the next level, which I would like to, so head of service director level, I will need a formal qualification to kind of back that up in terms of my on-the-job experience, but to actually have the knowledge, the required knowledge, the ability to kind of have a whole picture. I feel like that is critical.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, is that because, so just to clarify, is that because you feel to apply or say minimum degree experience required, or is it that you feel someone that's done a degree has better insight?
I feel like, for me, my personal perspective, I would need it for me to do the job the way in which I would see myself wanting to do the job. So to kind of maximise my kind of capability and ability, I feel like that is the bit which I would need to do it. It might not work, it might not be like that for everybody, but the way that my brain works, that is it. So I wouldn't say you particularly need the degree to apply for a job. There's some jobs which will ask for it, some jobs which won't, it depends. But for me, it's a kind of a bit of a safer option to make sure that I've kind of got something in my back pocket if I do need it.
Interesting. We'll have to talk about that separately, because you're now getting me wondering actually how much of because most people say the reason for it is there's so many requirements related to a degree when you apply for a job. And I know that at least in some of the organisations that I've worked in, we're trying to remove that requirement, because why should a degree determine? But you've almost made me reflect on it. It goes slightly wider than that. It's not just about hitting the requirements. It's actually about improving insight and, you know, the academic knowledge to kind of improve reflection and all of those kinds of things as well. What would you say is one of your biggest turning points? I know you mentioned when you moved to adult social care, but that was in relation to the team.
Yeah.
But in relation to a point in your career where you felt at your absolute best, at your strongest, and you just felt, I'm going to go places as a result of where I am now. Like you just felt really confident or felt really on top of your game. And in that, what was it that was different, whether it was from you or from your surroundings that enabled that? That's a big question and you might need a minute to think.
No, so I think once I moved into my role as a PMO manager, so when we had the opportunity to complete a new kind of corporate program management framework, something which was done completely from scratch, which required us to kind of communicate with a variety of different stakeholders across the organisation. It was a very high profile thing. There was a lot of efforts put into it by kind of myself and the team which we had, which seemed to be received extremely well by kind of senior leadership within the organisation. I felt that was the first point in which I kind of owned something and felt like it had been delivered and kind of followed through. So actually having an end product and actually seeing the impacts which he was making, I thought, okay, I've hit a level now which I didn't think I'd hit before. And that kind of gave me the stepping stone and courage to actually go and take the next step. So following that, once that was complete, I thought, okay, it's time for me to get out of Islington. I've been here for 10 years now. I've been in Islington the whole of my life pretty much. I need to do something to completely get out of my comfort zone, challenge myself and prove to myself that I am as capable as I now think I am.
It's amazing that it took for that piece of work to almost push you out of just having the career that you've had to date kind of thing. And I almost wonder, because I still remember it being referred to of, did a consultant do this or was this done in-house? Like, that's how good that work was. It was just incredible. And do you feel it was the people or individual that worked with you, that believed in you, that helped? Or do you feel it was actually just the piece of work and the way that it was that worked in your favour? Or do you feel like you thought, this is an opportunity and I'm going to step up and really deliver? Or like, what was it specifically about that you hadn't seen in all the years prior that made it different and made you feel like that?
A combination of things. So the team I was working with, extremely grateful to have had them. They all kind of pulled their weight. We all had different skill sets, all chips in with kind of different ideas. And I feel like it was the first piece of work which I actually felt like I owned and had responsibility for kind of delivering, which was something which I was trying to get prior to that, but it didn't seem to work out, or it wasn't the right piece of work. Again, timing. So I think with age comes maturity. I felt like I kind of matured a lot more in my career. So I just had my second child as well. So again, thinking in the long run, I would like my children to grow up, have a stable environment, see that their parents are both hardworking and able to kind of do stuff for themselves and are not content in kind of just lazing around or staying where they are. So again, me trying to provide a positive example for them. And then again, for me, at the time prior to that, I felt like I had hit a bit of a ceiling. So I didn't particularly know what I was going to do to kind of break through that ceiling to help me to get to the next step. So a combination of things.
I feel like the reference to you having your child and, you know, it really making you feel like, no, like I've got to make this work, if only to give them a stable foundation or to inspire them, is very similar, feels very similar to me as well. So it was only after I had my son that it kind of made me rethink my options and how, you know, it's hard, isn't it? Because on one hand, obviously the whole commitment, and you mentioned you've got things, you know, good work-life balance, other things outside of work is hard. But at the same time, it's almost like it makes you a better worker in a way. It makes you better at your job in some way. Do you think that's accurate? Or do you think actually sometimes I'm like, if I had no other commitments, I'd ace this 10 times more? Or do you feel like actually all the commitments outside makes me so much stronger?
Definitely all of the commitments outside. So I'm not the type of person that finds it easy to just focus on one thing. I feel like I've got too much brain capacity. My brain fires around 150 thoughts a minute. So I need to keep myself busy for me to feel like my engine is running smoothly. So yeah, I wouldn't say I've got the greatest concentration span either. So I need to be kept interested.
So you did something last year, which is move out of an organisation that you've worked for 10 years.
Yeah.
That you also is in the borough that you live in.
Yeah.
So that is huge. Did you have, I know you said you don't really have like a 5-year goal or, you know, like a long-term action plan or, you know, any of that, but did you feel that moment would come eventually, or did you feel like it was just out the blue, something happened for me to think I need to go out now, and you just did it? Like, what, after such a long period, actually made you take that plunge?
So there was one thing in particular which had a kind of major bearing on that. So my mum died last April from cancer. It was rough. So we had 4 or 5 months prior to her dying where I was pretty much her carer, did pretty much everything for her prior to her going into hospital. After she died, I felt like I just needed a fresh start. I needed to kind of get away from the kind of environment I was in. I wouldn't say I was particularly happy in Islington at the time due to me kind of feeling like I've been there for so long. I've hit a bit of a ceiling. I couldn't see what the next option was for me at the time for me to progress. So I thought, let me take a leap of faith. To be fair, it didn't take me too long to find something to go to. But again, I think prior to that, I didn't particularly look outside of the organisation for stuff to do. So that was the first point I actively spent looking outside for things which seem to pique my interest. I'm 100% sure that now, in hindsight, that I made the right decision. I feel like I've grown an awful lot in the 12 months I've been there. Again, it's boosted my confidence in terms of I know I'm capable. I know that I am valued. So it's worked out well so far. No complaints.
I know, obviously, you've worked in various roles over the 10 years at Islington and, you know, some outside of the team, some within the team. Mm-hmm. But obviously, everyone knows Daniel, and that might come with assumptions or that might come with... Do you feel actually going to a new organisation where no one knew you, it was almost on your terms and you could start fresh? Or do you feel like it was more like, oh my God, you almost shrunk into yourself more because you've gone to a completely different organisation and you felt like you had to start again?
So I didn't really feel like I had to start again. I felt it's building on what I had already kind of built. So in terms of kind of my own personal development, I know I needed that change. It gave me the opportunity to learn from a whole new set of people who I wouldn't have known. It's given me the ability to kind of understand another organisational culture, to understand that things don't work the same wherever you are. Everybody's experiencing different challenges, people interested in different things, priorities are different no matter where you go. But then again, there are still some similarities in terms of the people who seem to work for local government are very kind of committed to kind of ensuring that they are doing what is best for the residents or the people in the communities which they are trying to serve, which is something which is extremely important because at the end of the day, that is what you're there to do, to serve the people which you're working for.
Do you wish you moved earlier, or do you think, no, it was the right time?
No, I think it was the right time. Yeah, it was the right time. Yeah, there was...
You're not if I just moved after 3 years at Islington, I could have been like in a different place now, or do you think, no, everything has its time? And
no, so I think everything happens as it should be. I think you're in part in control of the way that your life is going to go, but I feel like everything happens for a reason. I feel like it was a positive that I managed to stick it out so long. Everything wasn't smooth running. So it's helped me to kind of build character. So again, positive. I don't regret staying so long. I love Islington. I still do. Maybe someday I may end up back there. Again, it's extremely close to my heart. But I do needed the change. I needed to kind of... The world is so big.
yes.
I was in a small borough the whole of my life, near enough 30 years in the same place. So for me to broaden my horizons and see what was out there is extremely kind of important.
Did you find it hard initially to settle or a completely different culture, only because you were with Islington for so long? Mm-hmm. Was there moments where you started questioning, have I made the right decision? Or actually, were you someone who you needed this so much, like you referenced it as a fresh start, and that you just went with it?
I would say I went with it. I would say the first couple of weeks are challenging. I think due to the kind of changes to the way of working following COVID and everybody working from home, so especially going into a new organisation and not being with your team in the office every day to kind of build up those kind of social relationships, understand how people work, sitting behind the screen, spending weeks on end trying to kind of read and research on what is actually kind of going on was challenging at the time. Again, I think people are still adjusting to kind of the new way of working. I don't think we'll ever go back to having 5 days in the office because people have changed their lives. People now doing jobs which they necessarily wouldn't have done because they've got the freedom to kind of work in a different way. I think, again, having some great people in my team, learning an awful lot, people actually spending the time to kind of get to know me and what my interests were, they made me feel a lot more kind of comfortable. So I thought it was pretty easy to kind of hit the ground running once I had done the initial kind of being in the teaming phase, kind of understanding the culture dynamic. So.
If someone was to start out their career now in the public sector, an aspiring leader, starting as an apprentice or in another field that's low level, but they know they want to eventually progress into leadership.
Yeah.
Is there any advice you'd give them thinking back about your own journey?
to always have a mentor or a coach. So somebody who you can kind of bounce your ideas off, somebody who's going to ask you the right questions to make your brain think in a slightly different way than what you would think. So I think over my years, I was lucky enough to have some good mentors or coaches who were able to ask me those probing questions, which then gave me something to take away and reflect on in terms of what I need to do to kind of get to my next point.
Would that be someone in the organisation you work in, or ideally outside, or does it make a difference?
So I think it's a mixture of both. So again, I think with coaching or mentoring, there's nothing wrong with saying to somebody, I don't think this is necessarily working for me. I feel like some people, when they choose to kind of go down that path, they feel like they're obliged to stick with somebody. Not everybody you kind of talk to or get matched up with, you're going to gel with. So it's kind of finding the right person that fits for you, kind of understands you, and provides a kind of different aspect or way of thinking than you do.
It is hard because I hear the importance of having a coach, having a mentor. What do you look for? How do you know when someone is the right fit rather than when someone isn't the right fit?
So for me in particular, I think somebody who's kind of had a similar background to me, so somebody who I can relate to is kind of most important. So I don't think somebody who's completely detached wouldn't have the slightest clue about kind of any of the challenges or issues which I faced previously. Somebody that is open to kind of being challenged as well, so they don't necessarily always feel that they're right. They're able to kind of take on board your comments as well and kind of reflect that back in a kind of positive way. And somebody that should just actually willing to give you some of their time. We understand that everybody's busy, everybody's got a ton of things which they need to do, but somebody is actually kind of dedicated to giving you some of that kind of energy to kind of help you as well.
And you mentioned representation. When you're even working in a team or working to a leadership team that maybe doesn't represent and is majority white, let's say, do you feel that your progression, and obviously as you move further up, there's going to be potentially less representation. Do you feel like that makes a big difference to how you perform, or not really? Or I don't know if that's the right question, not how you perform, but I suppose to how comfortable you feel in your role. Does it have any impact or no?
Representation is important. So I think the last two organisations I've been, the majority as white. I think there's been a shift over the last couple of years from it being middle-aged white men to now middle-aged white women. I wouldn't say there's a lot of kind of ethnic leaders in the organisations which I have worked in. And that is something which I would like to change. So I would like to be somebody who proves to the people who come after me that you can do it. There may be a ceiling. You can break through that ceiling. You're not made to have been stuck at a level. There is always room for progression.
If it is a majority white team and you're, do you feel actually that makes you stronger because you feel like you are represented, so you have to do a really strong job of it? Or do you feel like it inhibits you in some way?
I haven't actually thought about that, really. I'm just myself.
Yeah.
I like to be kind of my truthful, authentic self. I don't kind of try and change the way I am to try and fit into environments. You either like me or hate me, like Marmite, really.
Yeah.
Luckily for me, most people seem to like me, so
about to
I must be doing something right. But again, I do think, especially being in those spaces where I am kind of in the minority, I do try to kind of make sure that I kind of express myself and make my presence felt. So I don't want to be just a token black guy in the room. I want to make sure that I am there to kind of add value.
So this last question, I'm asking everybody, which is, if there was one thing a leader of an organisation, a chief exec, if they're watching, could do to improve or to better consider the lack of representation we currently have in leadership, what do you think is the one thing they could do or need to think about that would make a huge difference?
Listen to their staff and give people the opportunity to put their ideas forward. So especially where the majority of the kind of top tiers of the organisation are going to be white people. There are people who are lower down the organisation who will have ideas which will be extremely useful. They might not feel comfortable in going to those CG leaders to pitch whatever it is that they've kind of got thought up. But actually just making sure that there's a forum or a space for people to express themselves and give them the ability to kind of flourish.
Why do you feel like organisations that have forums, race forums or diversity forums or equality forums, why do you feel it's not quite getting there at the moment?
I feel like there's a lot of baggage people carry. So I think it might be generational. So people's kind of understanding their parents and families' kind of experience and how things have gone through, and people kind of holding on to things. It's hard to let things go, especially where, as a kind of minorities, we felt hard done by so long. I think that's something which has helped me in terms of I've tried to let all of that go. I'm not defined by what has happened before me. I am my own person. What I get out of life is what I make out of it, really. So again, I think people actually kind of understanding that things have been difficult or bad before, but there is always room to kind of progress. It may be small incremental steps, but at the end of the day, they're all going to kind of add up and in the sum kind of make a larger impact.
And in the same way, it feels almost like it's not an overnight fix as well. It's not just have a forum, have 20 people in there talking, take a log of it and your job's done. No. It's really actively, when you're saying listening, that sense of actively listening, going and wanting to make the change as well.
And utilising data. So data is extremely important. So kind of understanding where your kind of gaps are in the organisation, kind of having those people's discussions with people around what you can do to address some of the issues which you are facing. And then having a targeted action plan in terms of these are the small steps which we need to do, which we feel will make a difference.
Daniel, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Really appreciate you coming and being so honest, transparent and engaging with your reflections, your thoughts, your insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.